and I'm here today with my June wrap-up. I had a pretty good reading month in June in that I really liked and almost loved everything I read in June. So that was amazing. I didn't read a ton. I feel like I had a really good first quarter of the year. I was going really strong with how many books I was getting done a month. And now I'm swamped with other things. So I read what I read, and I'm not going to be sad about it anymore. I'm just happy to be reading books. So, without further ado, the first book I finished in June was Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal. This is a memoir by Jeanette Winterson. It is about her growing up, and it's a lot about the differences between her real life and the kind of fictionalized biography she presents in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. It's really interesting. She has a lot of advice about kind of writing and being a creative person and, living on the edge of society to an extent. Absolutely loved it. I highly recommend it for anyone who has read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I do not recommend it for anyone who has not read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. I think it's really important that you read that first. But absolutely wonderful. I listened to it on audiobook. I gave it 3.5 stars. I don't remember. It was great. I love Jeanette Winterson. Cannot wait to read more of her work. The next thing that I read is Well-Read Women. This is Portraits of Fiction's Most Beloved Heroines by Samantha Hahn. I recently hauled this. This took me all of 15 minutes to read because each page looks like this. But it is a really beautiful book, and it's just these amazing portraits that Samantha Hahn has done of famous female characters from literature. So there's Lily Bart from The House of Mirth. That's for you, Stephen. I got that for you. Etc. Here is Juliet from Romeo and Juliet. So I really enjoyed it. It's a super beautiful book. Really glad to have it. And I think I gave it 3 or 4 stars. Next, I finished Sweet Bitter by Stephanie Danler. I'm the only person on BookTube ever who actually enjoyed this book. I did a full review of it, which I will link down below. But really quickly, it's the story of a young girl who moves to New York City and gets a job working in a high-end restaurant in Union Square, and kind of about her adapting to restaurant life. And then there's this torrid romance, which I wasn't a huge fan of, but the accurate depictions of restaurant life so outweighed the bad things about this book for me that I ended up giving it 4 stars. Again, I have an awesome review of it if you want to check it out, in which I ramble a lot about my personal life and say basically nothing about the book. Yay! Next, I read Sarah Waters' Affinity. I believe I'm going to do a full review of this. I really adored this. This is a dual narrative, sort of. It goes back and forth between focusing on a protagonist named Margaret Pryor, who has recently suffered from a debilitating depression and is in rehabilitation. It's set in Victorian London, and Margaret Pryor's kind of part of her rehabilitation is to visit the women's prison and visit with the women there, and she becomes intrigued by this character named Serena Dawes, who has been imprisoned for basically being a seer or mystic, however you want to put it. Really awesome. Again, I think I'm going to do a full review of it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I finished a short story collection. This is Pretty Monsters by Kelly Link. I love Kelly Link. Guys, I love Kelly Link so much. This is the second collection of hers that I've read. I previously read Magic for Beginners. This is kind of marketed as a YA collection. I can kind of see that. A lot of the characters in the stories are young adults themselves. But some of the stories cross over from Magic for Beginners as well, and it didn't read necessarily like YA to me personally, and I don't particularly care for YA, so I wouldn't say that you should stay away from it on that account if you are also not a fan of YA. Absolutely adored it. Kelly Monster's stories are so weird. So strange, y'all, and I love it. I think my favorite story in the collection, oh gosh, I really enjoyed The Specialist's Hat, which is about these 2 little girls and their babysitter in this creepy old mansion in the mountains of North Carolina, where I live. I don't live in the mountains. I live in North Carolina. And what happens to them one night when their father leaves them alone with the babysitter. Super creepy, super good. There are a lot of ghost story elements to this collection, and I loved every single story in the collection. I gave it 4 stars overall. Next, I read All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. This is another book that I've heard mixed reviews on. It seems to be a little bit polarizing. It's a very strange book. It's definitely like a huge mashup between science fiction and fantasy. One character, whose name I can't remember right now. Oh my gosh, what is his name? Dun dun dun. Lawrence. Lawrence is really obsessed with science, and his best childhood friend, Patricia, believes that she is a witch, and they kind of go through their childhood together, and then they get split apart, and they meet up again when they're in their kind of mid-20s, and the world is falling apart around them due to natural disasters, and they have to figure out how to fix it. Basically, it's really hard to explain. I thought it was awesome. There are some elements of it that I wasn't a huge fan of. There are definitely some tropey characterization elements going on to an extent, but I thought it was really unique. I thought it was really intriguing and thought-provoking, and just an overall, like, really fun and immersive reading experience. Like, I couldn't wait to find out what happens next, which I don't read a lot of very fast-paced books, so that was exciting. So in the end, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars as well. The only comic trade I read this month was Volume 2 of Descender by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. I love this series. It is about a culture in outer space where robots are being hunted down, and it follows this one robot named Tim21 as he works to figure out why and kind of find the other robots. I don't know how to describe it. Again, I'm really, really bad at book synopses. I should not be allowed to do that. The art's beautiful. I will talk about it more in a comics wrap-up. I know I'm way overdue for one. I'm going to do one soon, I promise. The next book I finished is Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee. I have been wanting to read this for years and years and years, and for some reason I've never picked it up, despite it being a relatively short book. This was absolutely beautiful. This tells the story of a man. His name is David Lurie, and he's a professor out of school until he gets involved with one of his female students and kind of falls from grace with the university. And he moves out with his daughter to a very rural part of South Africa where she lives on a farm. It's all I can really give away, but he and his daughter kind of are trying to figure out their relationship amidst a very chaotic environment where there's a lot of racial tension in South Africa at the time. And our protagonist himself is also trying to kind of figure out what he wants out of life and what's going on with him now that he's basically had to give up everything he's ever known and start over. Absolutely incredible writing, absolutely beautiful book. I gave it 4 stars. It wasn't quite 5 stars for me. It was really close. It was a really wonderful book. I did have a few issues at times with the way that some of the female characters were represented and the way that kind of their thought patterns were represented. And I can't give that much away without spoiling it, but there were a couple of like really tiny problematic moments to me where I went, huh. But overall, really well done, really amazing book. Then I read 2 essay collections at the end of the month, which is super weird for me. I don't read that many essay collections. The first thing I read was Changing My Mind by Zadie Smith. This is occasional essays by Zadie Smith, and they cover everything from literary criticism to kind of autobiographical essays to essays on writing and Audrey Hepburn and the Oscars. Really good and really interesting collection. I would really recommend this to anyone who enjoyed Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, as it's kind of got this same sort of feel to it and structure to it, though not everything is about feminism. There's definitely a lot of social critique, though, about race and gender throughout the collection. Definitely enjoyed it. My favorite essay is one that she's super famous for, and it is called... I believe that it is called That Crafty Feeling, and it's about, it's like 10, it's a version of a lecture that she gave to students at Columbia University's writing program, and it's like her 10 steps to be a successful writer, and it was really funny, but also like kind of harshly down to earth. Excellent stuff. Love Zadie Smith. I just pre-ordered her new book, which comes out in October or September, I think. I'm so excited. The last thing I read is The Geek Feminist Revolution. I technically finished this at like 8 a.m. on July the 1st, but I read almost all of it except for like the last 10 pages in June, so it's a June book. You've probably seen this. Kind of everyone's reading this right now because it just came out at the end of May. This is a collection of essays that Cameron Hurley has written on fan culture and feminism and women's place in kind of the science fiction fantasy world. It's really good. I gave it 4 stars overall. The only reason it wasn't 5 stars for me is that some of the essays kind of started to get muddled and run together. Like, I feel like a lot of the same points were made over and over again, which makes sense as it wasn't written like originally as a collection. A lot of these essays have been published elsewhere before. But it was awesome. I cannot wait to read some of Cameron Hurley's fiction, which I've never done before, but now I am so excited to do so. So those are all of the books I read in June. As you know, I don't do monthly TBRs anymore, but I do have a few books that I am currently reading right now. I am reading Feminine Gospels by Carol Ann Duffy. This is a collection of poetry. I've only read like the first 2 poems, but so far, so good, really awesome. This is one of the group reads for the Feminist Orchestra Book Club, and absolutely loving it, and I'm in love with this cover. I am also, of course, reading Homegoing by Yagi Yassi, which everyone is reading right now. I am a little over halfway through, and I am obsessed with this book. This book, oh my god, it's so good. So, if you don't already know, the premise of this book is that there are 2 half-sisters born in Africa during the slave trade. One of the sisters gets sold into slavery, and the other sister marries a white man and stays in Africa. And then it follows their descendants for like 7 generations, I think. I'm not sure because I'm not at the end yet. And kind of the differences in their lives on these 2 separate continents, even though they came from basically the same place. Really fascinating, super well done, amazingly well written. If the next like 100 pages are as good as the first 200 were, this will maybe be my favorite book of the entire year so far. And I'm also reading Avenue of Mysteries by John Irving. Let me tell you what, I am about 130 pages into this, and I was really nervous going into this because I love John Irving. But this book is, like, the premise did not sound much like his other books. There's a lot of cultural stuff that he's taking on in this book. It's about a man who grew up in Mexico in kind of the poor section in poverty in Oaxaca, and he travels to the Philippines as an adult, is kind of looking back on his childhood. So I was really nervous about this, but I'm really enjoying it so far. It's pretty good. So let's hope that John Irving just keeps on keeping on. I imagine that it will only get better as it progresses because John Irving writes his books backwards, which is cool. But then you don't have to worry about the ending being super weak because he like drifted off at the end there. Anyhow, that's what I'm currently reading. I feel a little weird today. If you've read any of these books and would like to discuss them in the comments, please let me know. Again, I have a review of Sweetwater. I will have a review of Affinity up soon. And I hope you all had a lovely June. Please tell me what your favorite books were that you read in June and what you are currently reading that you're super into. I will see you next time. Bye!